And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Angels and demons and monsters and serpents. Wise ones. Fuck the script arts this time. We are talking about the wise of
Welcome
the wise.
back to NP Snake. We were just talking about why topic, and that was a wonderful piece by Aethrum Studios.
All right, NPR, get out of here. Oh! Get him out! That's right. Throw him into the steak pit. That was gross.
Who the hell was that guy?
I don't know. So, on the topic of like the motivations and the why, I don't really know. I keep thinking about this. Like, what is the heart of the why circle for me in this?
Okay, for you.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You still have stuff to say. Go ahead. You had stuff to say.
I was going to finish my monologue here.
Yeah, just tell me to shut up. Like, don't let me carry on. It's like, hey, bro, wait.
No, but I'm interested to hear.
Yeah,
you're
too soon.
So for me, I don't know how else to describe the motivation that I have. I guess that's what it is. It's motivation.
Yes, it's absolutely motivation.
I am freaking obsessed with history and particularly ancient history.
Yeah.
But I can't even say that because like all the way up until like last week, right? That history.
Yeah.
As it compares to ancient history and all of it. And including the history of the universe, like all of that, everything that I've learned from talking with you and digging into these great mysteries has just, I feel that that subject is paramount. Like,
yeah,
there is something, our future as humans, the human race, I don't know how to describe this. Like, I feel like it is paramount to our future as humans to know what is going on here.
Yeah.
And these discussions that you and I have had for years on that topic and on trying to figure out how the universe works on top of that has inspired me in so many ways, and I have a desire to share it, just like Martin Luther King with his "I have a dream" speech. Like he had a dream, and he wanted to share it.
Yeah,
and I feel the exact same way, and I've felt the same way with my music too. But I didn't really understand the why as deeply as I do now because of these conversations that we've had over many, many years about really who we are and what we are doing here. And it's fascinating to look at these great mysteries in the universe and in human history to help kind of, like you put it the other day, put these pieces of this grand puzzle together.
Yeah.
And I've always been a person who I love riddles.
Yeah.
And when I get a new riddle, or if I create a new riddle, I share it.
Yeah.
Because the process of someone coming to the answer I love watching that. I love being a part of that.
Yeah, you're the kind of guy that like walks the maze and then finds a way to stand above it to watch other people also walk the maze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see how they figure it out, and I also want to know, like, you know, because other people have their own way of looking at things, and it's like so many times you can be describing something you've been thinking about for forever to somebody, and they're just like, blah blah, and
you're like, holy shit, yeah,
did not think of that.
Yep.
And that's great, but if removing all of that, if there was just like, without the podcast, if I could have imagined a way to just share all of these conversations that have like continue to blow my mind for years and like excite me about the world that we live in and about about humanity and about our past and about our future. And really, like, they motivate these conversations, and the things that we've learned and discovered together have motivated me in every aspect of my life.
Yeah.
And it's not only just to like kick ass, but it's like in every aspect. Like what I do at work as a farmer, I am like, you know, from day one we were like, "Ugh, so this is what ancient people did, you know."
Yeah. About high time we learned it.
Yeah, grapes and olives.
That's
okay. Right. But learning the chemistry and just learning the land and the cycles of these plants, I started thinking about things like that. Like these, you know, past humans learned these cycles, learned how to cultivate these plants, and did all this stuff, and so it inspires me, like what I've learned in these conversations with you, to really dive into the farming.
Yeah.
Just full on all the way. Like I want to know everything. I want to, and every time I learn something new, I'm like, ha, and it's like,
yeah,
I love it. With my music, it's the same way. Like discovering what ancient peoples did with their art, and that they used a beautiful form of art in architecture, and they put mathematics into their art forms, and all of these things about the universe that they had discovered. They put it in a building out of the stone that they put together. Made me realize, like, that's how I should approach music.
Right.
The way they incorporated these fundamental cycles of our solar system into sort of like verses of text. I'm like, holy shit, that's how I need to approach lyrics.
Right.
And it's not because I want to copy them. I do want to copy them, but what they're doing, I don't want to.
You're doing it. You're finding out how to do it in harmony.
Yeah, I want to do it because it's a way to preserve the things that we have achieved.
Yeah,
as a human race.
But it's also like, if you do it, this is why I think they were doing it. It's preservative, but it's also, this is the right way, because this is how the universe is doing it. If you also do it that way, it harmonizes with the whole universe.
Yeah, and it teaches you, it also, as you do it, if you attempt to do it, it teaches you things.
Absolutely,
like, so if you're carving a piece of wood, or you're trying to make something out of a piece of wood, and you're thinking about things like the golden ratio in the proportions.
Yeah.
Then you begin to like see very interesting things.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I'm just making this up, but like the rings of the tree as you're carving into the side of it, trying to make this sort of golden ratio curve.
Yeah.
Could like make this badass pattern coming out of it that looks like,
you
know what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
it's stuff like that I've found when I just, every time I'm building something, I'm always thinking about these, you know, sacred geometry aspects of it. And it always turns out badass.
Yeah, you came up to me, you're showing me something you were carving for salt, like some car.
Yeah.
And you were like, yeah, and I used the golden ratio, and I was like, oh, well, that's why it looks right.
Yeah, it looks like a car.
Yeah, and it was still half complete, and I was like, why does it look exactly like a fucking car? Like, everything's in the right spot. There's, you know, normally when people are making something, you can see like, okay, the tire's a little off, or something's wrong. But it was just like, wow, it looks right. And then when you said that, I was like, oh, well, that's why. Like, it's almost like cheating. You don't even have to try to put the things in the right place. They just go.
Yeah.
there.
So I made him a set of blocks, you know, and all the blocks I cut to the golden ratio. So their proportions and how their width to their length.
Yeah.
Were a golden ratio.
You know he's going to build something in that thing one day. It's just going to like open a portal.
Yeah. So I used it like a puzzle piece because every block is the same size, and I made 30. What did I make?
33.
36 of them.
36.
And it made a perfect rectangle.
Yeah.
Right. When you put all the blocks together in the rectangle, it's also the golden ratio.
Right.
So
it has to be.
Yeah. So I started like building all these structures out of the blocks, you know, based on their own geometry. And it's like
it's intrinsic.
All these structures, like you can build this structure over and over and it looks freaking kick ass.
Yeah.
Then I started discovering that I could teach him proportion using the blocks, because I can make a rectangle.
Yeah.
And then I can hold one of the blocks and stand up and hold that block in front of me and look down and see it perfectly covers that rectangle. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then if I bring it closer to my eye, it covers the outside of the rectangle. Or if I go down, it covers the inside of the rectangle. It's like all these little things. I was like, dude, this is
this thing on the floor is to the block. They're the same.
Right.
This block has the same proportions as that thing, and it was made of these blocks.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's like all of these things I've discovered playing with these blocks that he's not really old enough to really discover those things yet. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's so
He's
I
immersed in it
learn
already.
all of this stuff from just using these things. So that's the kind of stuff that's what I mean when I say these conversations and the things that we have learned together and this whole journey has inspired me in every aspect of the things that I'm interested in my life. In every way, I'm always like comparing or thinking about these things in reference to what I'm doing. And so the why I am doing this podcast, I would say that the most fundamental thing about it is that I have gotten so much. It has changed my life.
Yeah.
These types of things for the better. It's made me realize purpose in everything that I do that is so farther beyond just like, oh, I want to get rich and become badass. It's like
It goes even beyond existential in the sense it's like, I know what you're talking about.
yeah. So like, for example, when I record a song, I'm not thinking like, I hope this song becomes a hit.
Yeah.
What I think is, in terms of wanting a song to become a hit, it doesn't need to be a hit
Yeah.
now.
Right.
It could be a hit if it was known 1,000 years from now, discovered 1,000
Yeah.
years from now. That's what I think about. Like,
Right.
is this song worthy of being preserved
Yeah.
far beyond my death?
Right.
Because of the information and the beauty of it.
Yeah. Or is it something that like may be accidentally preserved far beyond your death, and then if it's rediscovered by somebody, will they
Learn something from it?
then propagate it because they're like, oh my god?
Not only that, but
Yeah.
would they if they translated
teach
the
them something?
language,
Yeah.
would it teach them something about the universe? Would it teach them something fundamental?
Yeah.
And I love that idea. And I'm not trying to say that I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I hope that I can. It drives me. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. And so the fundamental why is that I want to share this that has inspired every aspect of my life with everyone and put it on the internet and have it be available and hope that
Yeah.
that people listen to it and get out of it the why that I have.
Right.
Because it's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Sharing the why. That's really meta because that's what you're doing right now too.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, here's the why. I
Inside
want
the
to do
why,
this
inside the
because
why,
I want
inside
to
the
I want to tell you about the why.
But until you brought this up the other day, I didn't think about it in those terms. But there's always this level of excitement when we discuss these things.
Yeah.
And it's also cool, like, fuck yeah, we're finally doing this podcast where
Yeah.
we're actually recording it and putting it out there in the ether.
Yeah.
And so there was this excitement, but until you brought it up, I hadn't really focused on why am I excited about that?
Right.
And that is the answer. Because I hope that I could be the seed that inspires somebody else to just like dive into this shit and discover things for themselves, because it's so motivating in every aspect of life.
Yeah. That's cool. I have some of that too.
But otherwise, we're gonna get hit by like a massive rock from outer space, and we're all gonna die.
Right.
So
Right. So somebody's got to say this shit.
we're doomed.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. That's actually kind of. I have a hard time with my why because, like, I think all of those things that you just said, like, I'm gonna do this is kind of like this conversation we had reversed, right? Everything you just said, I agree with, but right, we had this conversation a couple of nights ago,
Right.
Except I went first, and then you came second, and I'm like, yeah. So everything you just said, I totally agree with it, but there's this other thing.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about it a lot because I was not really able to communicate. I mean, I tried like 3 or 4 different ways of getting at it. And as I was saying the things I was saying to you then, some of them were new to me as I was saying them. Like they were being
Yeah.
created. Like I was having the realizations as I was talking. And I was
Right.
like, wow, that's really cool.
I
But
call
it's-
that fleshing it out.
yeah, but it was still not what I was trying to get at. And then I would try again, and then I'd be like, wow, that's also really cool, but it's still not it. And then I remembered episode 2. That's kind of like, it's like almost like I kind of did it then. Like at the very end of episode 2, out of nowhere, I just announced that I've had this recurring dream about the Pillars of Enoch. And what I was doing there was explaining in some, like, because we had just finished this enormous podcast full of all these tangents about ancient weird shit. And the Pillars of Enoch are a sort of symbol of ancient knowledge, but specifically ancient knowledge that if you discover these pillars, it will be given to you. Like, in other words, the discovery of the Pillars of Enoch symbolically is the acquisition of all this ancient knowledge. Okay. So I still have this dream. And like it's affecting me to the point now where, like, you know, this is going to sound really strange, but this is affecting me to the point now where I will be considering, I try not to do this in public, but I will be considering like something just amazing from the distant past. And I have these glimpses of the potential of the people that did these things, right? And I can't even stand. Like I literally have to sit down, and I'll start crying. Like it's really, I've never had anything like this happen to me before. I don't know why it's so powerful to me. It's emotional on some kind of fundamental level. But it's and the emotion that's happening is like this incredibly deep sense of loss. But there's also this kernel of like, fuck you in there. Like there's this anger. Because, you know, so at first, when it was first beginning to happening, I was noticing the anger more. I was like, what is that? What is that? Like, I would feel frustrated, right? Like this, like even though there was this deep sense of loss, at first I could only pay attention to the anger. Like there was this sense of like, God damn it, right? Now it's still there, but I've now noticed how small it is because I've allowed myself to sort of pay attention to the grief. Okay, because I started to question that, like, what is this do? Where is this coming from? Is my question. Like, what's going on here? And for a while, I was associating it with the dreams because in the dreams, I feel this grief. I have this enormous. I see the pillars. I can somehow read them, but it's not really reading. When I see them, I suddenly remember. It's more like remembering, and I just know all of this shit. I know the entire history of the human race and all this amazing shit that's happened, but it's been continuously destroyed and smashed. Right. And so there's this enormous grief because I'm like, oh my God, like all the stuff, all the people, all of the ideas, the beauty, the you know, just kind of like the take everything badass about humans and then magnify it times 100 and then smash it on purpose. Right. It's like that. It's just there are these visions of cultures that had a much more full understanding. Like right now, our understanding of a lot of things is very lopsided and it only looks in certain pieces. So we have this, like, you know how dangerous certain types of machinery can be if you don't have a full understanding of what they're going to do when you turn them on.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how we interact with the universe and with ourselves. We don't understand ourselves. And so we have these inherently dangerous cultures where basically you can just walk out into them and get shredded, you know, and it's not anybody's particular fault. I mean, it will be a human that does it to you or whatever, but it's really, like, in the grand scheme of things, you're getting shredded because the machinery is being operated by people who don't know what it does, right?
Wow.
Huh?
That's a badass analogy.
So I see in the dream, I see the pillars and I see what it's like when we do understand the machinery. And I can't even describe it, but it's so fucking awesome and beautiful, but it's gone. So there's this.
We finally understood it too late, or is there not really you don't know why?
I don't know why. Okay. All I know about the gone is that it's not our fault.
Yeah.
In other words, the gone is coming from, like, something else is destroying it. It's not us.
Yeah.
And it was deception and a bunch of other shit. In other words, we were tricked. Like, I don't know. I'm not really clear on that. I just know that it's like, holy shit. We were like a child prodigy, you know, in a protected place, like playing beautiful music. And then some like fucking pedophile jumps in there, rapes the fuck out of them and murders them. Like, you're just like, what the fuck? You know, like I mean, that's a terrible analogy because it makes it base, but you just have something beautiful and also innocent, like it's playing with the universe, right? Where the the cultures that I see are joyful in their creations. They're just having a shitload of fun doing all this crazy badass stuff with the things that they understand. And there's no like, I can't say there's no suffering because we live in a material realm, but they understood why we were in a material realm. They had this full understanding of what's going on. Okay, so and like, you know, the thing about suffering is if you're suffering and you have no idea why, that makes it terrible, right? So a baby or a person who is like unable to think because they've had some head injury, they don't know why they're in pain, and that makes it last forever, and they just scream, right?
Yeah.
But somebody who like understands that I just got into an accident, the pain is terrible right now, but I have this contiguous timeline in which I see previous to the pain, and then I see why it happened, and I understand that it's pain, but I also understand that at some point in the future it will lessen. That makes it
A little more
bearable.
Yeah.
You don't scream nonstop, right? So right now we're like the person, our suffering is like the person who doesn't know why they're suffering. We just scream nonstop because we don't understand where it's coming from or why it exists. These previous cultures that in the dreams I see through the pillars, they didn't have that. They still suffered, but they knew why. And so it was bearable. Okay? And there's so many things like that I can't even begin to describe. And then there's always the remembering, like, but it's fucking gone.
And that's why you get pissed.
And then it's gone because it was taken or destroyed or whatever, right? So yeah. So like this, I think, is the heart of my motivation, that our potential is hidden in these mysteries that we're studying.
Yeah.
Okay? Like not yours and mine, but like just
right.
all of us. And like there's some kind of that it's okay. The potential is there, and it's possible to get it back. Okay? It's possible to get it back, but people have to look for it.
Yeah. People have to seek it.
Yes, it has to be sought. Okay? And it's really so it's really difficult to seek because the first time we found this knowledge, we didn't have all of the like the handicaps that we have now. Like they were still learning, but they were innocent. Okay, they were learning from a place of pure ignorance. They didn't think they knew anything, so their learning was pure in the sense that they didn't misconstrue shit. I mean, they probably did, but they weren't like telling themselves the wrong story all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I may not be explaining this very well.
No, it makes sense.
So now we're trying to learn. We have to unlearn a whole bunch of crap that's caused by the fact that we've been screaming for all this time that we lost this shit. Okay, so we have to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff, and like there's all these cultural barriers, and there's enormous political barriers, and there's social barrier. I mean, just it doesn't matter. Like there's 6,000 years of stuff telling us that everything we're trying to look at is wrong and bullshit, or it's not worth looking at, or whatever. And there's also some kind of force, something, I don't know what it is. I'm sure people are thinking he's talking about aliens, but I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what they are. I don't even know if they're they, but there is something that wasn't us that destroyed this thing that we were building, this culture, this understanding, this potential, right? This future was completely erased. Like sometimes I think about the Fermi paradox, the Fermi paradox that basically says, where is everybody? Like when we look out there, like we were supposed to be the everybody, like, but it was taken, and that's not really part of the why. I just, that I'm trying to convey the gravity of what seems to have happened here, or at least how I see it. Like sometimes I just wonder, like there's a disharmony that has been happening, at least we know within us, for a long time, and it you can see subtle clues of it, like when you in our dealings with animals. Like why do animals treat us the way they do? Like there's this constant, like if humans are around, animals are like paying attention to everything we do, right? And like even if they completely know you're safe, like there are some like in parks, They know they can run right past you. You're not going to hurt them. You're not going to chase them or whatever. But they're still really freaking wary of you, right?
Yeah.
You're just like, I don't know. I see it in pets too. They look at you like, I don't know what they're about to do.
Yeah.
Always. Even though you've lived with them your entire life, I've never hurt this animal. I never would hurt this animal. But you make a sudden movement and they're like, what is he doing? And it's like, and it's like they are aware that the human race is insane. Like they're aware that there's something fundamentally fucking twisted, right? That we're, I don't know. So then you have to ask, like, why do the cats and dogs live with us anyway? Like, they're like, I'm literally living with a crazy person, right? That I don't know what they'll do at any given moment because they're irrational. They're not rational in terms of nature, which is always like, I just need to fucking make sure that I've got food, make sure that I've got shelter, right? That rational in that way. They're not rational like that, but neither are they rational in their own kind of sort of ideas of rational, which is like always making logical sense. You don't do either one of those, like sometimes you'll just flip out and start breaking shit and nobody knows why. And they seem to be aware of this. And so they're paying attention to you. They're like, oh, fuck. You're like, I'm just shifting the chair, kitties. And they're like, oh, I don't know. So, and we always, you can see in the culture that people feel like we don't belong here or anywhere. Right. And it's because, or like the Native Americans will say, we don't live in harmony, right? Or they try to, and they say like, yeah, the Western culture, white people, you guys are not living in harmony at all. They're trying to, but they don't know what harmony is. They're not sure. They have these paths that are very ancient, that they hope are telling them what living in harmony means, but they also are aware that they've lost it.
Yeah.
And they have the stories of the world being destroyed over and over and over by forces that are sort of beyond us. Okay. And so they have gone from, in their own stories, they go from like having enormous, very advanced civilizations down to like living a subsistence and sort of nomadic thing because they're trying to live in harmony and keep from being destroyed again and again and again. Right. So my motivation, I guess, why I'm doing this is because the more people that are thinking about these things. I mean, number one, like all the stuff you said, it's badass to come to these understandings and be like, holy shit, except for when I'm like, that's not badass, but I try not to do that in public. But when you tell these things to people and then they respond to it and they start thinking about it and you see them get excited about it, I love that. I totally fucking love that. That's really cool. And especially when because they have their own perspective, they say something that blows your fucking mind. You're like, yeah, I'm about to blow their mind. They're like, oh wow, blah blah blah. And you're like, like, so I love that part. So that's a big part of why I'm doing this. But I think, like, having tried to dig down all the way to the very bottom to the depths of the why is because there's something that we lost that we should be able to get back, and like, it's a tragic thing that we lost it. I can't do anything about that, but the only way I can think of to alleviate this like enormous grief that I feel is to regain it and have it again. Because then I can be like, well, that sucked, but we're cool now, right? Like that's the only the things that we lost will always be lost, but and there will always be that sadness. Like, so even if this whole thing this story that I've just made up is true, and we regain all this knowledge, we'll never know completely the story of those people before. Yeah. I don't think. Maybe we will at some point, but most of their story is lost to us. That in itself is a tragedy. Like, this is part of the reason why we don't know who the fuck we are and what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is why we have quant stuff everywhere. Like, we're like that lost expedition. But the generations have gone on long enough, and enough tragedy, enough people have died, and enough things have had to be burned just to keep us warm at night that we don't even remember that we are a lost expedition.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to get back towards that knowledge. Like, somewhere here on this planet, maybe spread out, maybe all in one place, that knowledge exists. All the ancient stories tell us that some people were able to hide it before these enormous destructions came. And then some of those places that were hidden were not able to be retrieved after the destructions were over, and then they were forgotten about. But they're still there.
Yeah.
So that's really my main why is because I want to. I think that finding that knowledge is like we have to.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying too. That it's paramount.
Yeah.
That we, for our future.
Yeah.
That we learn our
Yeah.
past.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that when you were saying it, and I'm like, can I fairly say that it's for the future of the human race? Because that's a really big thing. I know that I like that finding it will change all that and make the future of the human race badass. But I can't say that that's the why for me. Like, I don't think that that's motivational. I do love the fact that that's there, but for me, the why is more like the finding itself. Just to where if I could just sit down after we find it and be like, okay, everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's gonna be fucking badass too. You know what I mean?
But I totally agree with that. But why is that badass? Why is that cool? That everything's going to be badass. It has to do with.
I mean, that's what I would say.
What I'm saying is that it has to do with ourselves. And I've never really considered myself a person who thinks about all of humanity.
Yeah, I don't think that's really possible.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I've heard people say stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's never really resonated with me. But
Right.
until we really dove into this stuff with ancient history and exactly all of the things that you're talking about, when I saw and began to see these patterns and in the way that knowledge and ideas had been preserved,
Yeah.
there suddenly, and the great lengths that we as a race went
Yeah.
to preserve them for what?
Right.
Our future. Not the people who built it,
Right.
not their future, but the future of everyone like them to come.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, when I started to realize, like, God, they did all of this to preserve something.
Yeah.
For it. So it must be like ridiculously important.
Right. Anybody who thinks about, like, we're going to go to this enormous amount of trouble to make something last 10,000 years. That you need enormous motivations to do that.
Right. And that's
Like,
what I'm saying.
You can't be guilt tripped into that.
So what did they know that was so important that drove them to do these things?
Yeah.
It must be great.
Right.
Right. And then thousands of years later, there were things that were written about those things.
Right.
And those things were so important, even though that they had quantified it by that time.
Yeah.
That they were like,
They
we
still
must take these now and
change
go
the
hide
world.
them in a cave
That's
before this
right.
library burns because they are so important, but they don't
Yeah.
know why.
Right. They don't know why.
And so I'm with you on that. Like, I totally agree. But I guess the way I extrapolate out is that it's for our future.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, maybe I don't have the full why of it yet, because like the future is something that makes me happy that it'll be great if we find this stuff. But I can't say that that's my motivation, even though that's definitely
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Because my motivation as well is more in the realm of my lifetime, right? My
Right.
motivation is like, what can I achieve now?
I guess like, so going back to all these TED Talks I was listening to, now I can't even discern one from another. I listened to them in a row, so I don't even know which ones were talking about what. I just have all this stream of stuff that I was hearing. So I'm not even going to try
TED
to
talking.
Yeah, TED Talks. So this guy was talking about motivations or whatever, and like the if you want to really pare it down to like what are people really trying to do, period, just in general, and that is be satisfied with their life, right? Just kind of, that's whatever it takes to do that. And so I think that even if we don't find them, but if we could just sort of push the pursuit forward noticeably, or get a bunch of people involved in it so that it becomes an actual, like, okay, this is an institutional fucking like search, like,
Yeah.
or anything like that, anything that actually,
Yeah.
that, like, I would be not just content but ecstatic to work in that field for the rest of my life. I would just be like, going to work every day would be great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just doing that as a not want to say job, just as a, that would be, I would just love that. I could go to work and work 18 hours a day, not and just be fucking ecstatic all the time. Like, this is what I want to do. You know, pursue this, like find this out, and then fuck whoever destroyed it. Because, you know, hopefully we find out who that was when we find the knowledge. Because fuck them, like whoever they were. And that's probably why they're trying to hide it from us, because they know that if we find it, we're gonna be like, hey, fuck, what the fuck you guys, and they're gonna be fucked after that.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah. It's a pretty diverse word.
All right, we're gonna take one more break.
All right, snake a breaker.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent, spreading the desire for knowledge all across the stony plains. From the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, we hail 2 snakes. Hail. And hail. Hail snakes.
Hail serpents. So it is it's Halloween. We're in here recording and everybody else is out trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
And no kids have come to the door. I've been surprised. I brought some candy just in case. They walked up.
Trick or treat.
Yeah. We built a badass scarecrow. You like the mustache again?
Yeah. The scarecrow with a mustache.
Yeah, I came down with
spinning pumpkin head
with a way better marker, and I was like darkening the eyes and shit, and I gave him some brows, and I was like, he needs a big Pez mustache.
He's got a fez hat.
Yeah. So I gave him
the weirdest freaking
I gave him
scarecrow.
the long curl at the end, you know.
Yeah, it's the strangest guy. I'm gonna go out there and like turn his head.
Yeah.
So he's looking in a different direction from time to time.
So there's a lot of, if you read people, sort of contemporary authors, or even not contemporary, you can go back into the Renaissance, Victorian Egypt, Victorian England, when they're discussing All Hallows Eve, Halloween, that it appears to be, it appears to be a celebration that has no purpose. You know, it's like, where did this come from? Why are we doing this? I mean, now especially, of course, in the modern period, it's about candy, and you know, people have even lost the what trick or treat was.
Yeah.
Which I'm not even going to go into that stuff. There's you can follow this whole line of like, Halloween seems to be about losing the reasons we're doing stuff in Halloween. Because like you'll have these little trends that appear, and then people will start doing that trend, and then eventually they quant stuff that trend, and then they don't even know that there was a quant stuffed trend, and now they're just trick-or-treating and they have no idea what's going on. You know, it's like they go out there to get candy.
Yeah.
Right. And that's been happening with this like period for as long as you can look at it, any history about it. No one knows why, you know, but because of the modern age and the globalization of information, it's become a lot easier to look at this tradition and find out where it is, where it's celebrated, and what they do when they're celebrating it. And what's fascinating about it is that it seems to be global. So normally it's considered a fall festival. So typically it'll be considered to have it'll be associated with, you know, the seasons and agriculture and in some way. So the fall, it's like the harvest, right? And a lot of times there's fire involved. So people would consider that like at this point you've completed the harvest. The crop fields are just kind of dry, dead crops, and they've all been harvested or whatever. And like sometimes they would burn them, set the fields on fire on purpose, right? So that you don't have this, over the winter, you don't have this dry, like sort of papery tinder out there that could accidentally get started on fire by lightning. So they would purposefully go out and burn the fields, kind of controlled burn them. And maybe that turned into the celebration, because like there's the fire and the harvest and whatever. But the problem is that it's also celebrated in the Southern Hemisphere, which is like spring during this period. So that doesn't make any sense. And yet in the Southern Hemisphere where they celebrate it, it's also considered an agricultural thing. It's connected, but everywhere basically you kind of see these two. You see fire and agriculture, and the dead.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are lots of different names for it over history, just in Western civilization, like All Hallows Eve, or All Souls or All Saints Day or whatever. And sometimes it's a 3-day period. It's like it's longer than one night or whatever. But there's really, it's considered to be a period where the dead walk the earth. Okay, so there's some fun stuff about that, like the reason why people dress up. Like we dress up now, and it's mostly like the dudes are all dressing up as something funny and the chicks are dressing up as something hot, and like that's basically how it goes, right? But the purpose, like the dressing up ritual, came from people dressing up or trying to sort of disguise themselves as the dead, so that they looked like the dead, so that the dead would not attack them on the night of the dead, right? So if you had to go out, you made yourself look like a zombie or a ghost, so that the ghosts and zombies would leave you alone because they think you're one of them, right? So that's why people put on these costumes. But now it's just like chicks are dressing hot and dudes are dressing funny. But there was a purpose of the costumes initially, that like this sort of disguised you so that you could go out amongst the dead on the night of the dead. All that stuff is really fascinating, but like really the questions come like, so why is it a Day of the Dead? Like, what does harvest have to do with dead people? What is, or in the Southern Hemisphere, what is the spring planting? I mean, spring is about life, so why is it the Day of the Dead? And then the fire. So I know like you don't like it when I read from the phone, but I have a couple of quotes from this guy. The first dude recently who was really getting fascinated by this, and it was a Halliburton. Yeah, it's one of those Halliburtons.
Oh man, it's probably all lies, paid for by the government.
But it's Robert Grant Halliburton from 1831 to 1901. So that's kind of far back to blame the government on. He probably never talked to somebody from the government. But basically, he was an anthropologist or whatever, and he traveled the world as an explorer, and he discovered he was kind of famous for discovering totally uncontacted tribes. He'd climb up some mountains or whatever and meet some people that just wanted his head or whatever. They wanted to shrink his head, but he would somehow convince them not to do that, and he would hang out with them long enough to learn some things about their culture.
He was colluding with tribes.
Yes, yeah, he was absolutely colluding with tribes. Yeah, and then he'd come back and change the president. But he was asked, so when he would come back to civilization, they would ask him to publish papers and stuff. They would, we want you to give a speech at this conference or whatever, tell us some stuff. And so there was one time where he was kind of like, what am I going to talk about? And he decided to work on, he was like, well, I'll look at this Festival of the Dead, because he had been all over and he'd seen all these different people and they're all celebrating it. Like all these primitive people plus these advanced cultures are all doing the same thing on the same day. So he kind of was like, well, I'll ask this question. And let's see. It was, 1859. He was getting ready to present a paper for the Society of Antiquaries of London. So he's going to talk about the customs connected with All Souls Day. And he realized that the coincidences in the observance of this festival by different nations were much more striking than I had first supposed, right? So he spends the next 9 years looking into this question. And he has some really... Well, this is the quote I wanted to read. And like, for some reason, I hear it in this like weird English voice where he's like, a new and most startling fact was discovered when I came to read over the paper I had prepared. It was singular that the Festival of the Dead amongst the ancient Peruvians was celebrated on the same day as the Spaniards, on All Souls Day, November the 2nd. I had also considered this merely as a curious coincidence, but it was generally observed in November south as well as north of the equator. a fact so remarkable that it was evident that whatever could be the cause, it must be something hitherto unknown, right? I don't know why I hear it in that
That's
voice.
great.
But I totally do.
Yeah, me too now.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Whatever the hitherto unknown something was that inspired this curious coincidence in regards to the universality of the Festival of the Dead. Further researchers revealed to Halliburton that the festival is now, or was formerly, observed at or near the beginning of November by the Peruvians, the Hindus, the Pacific Islanders, the people of the Tonga Islands, the Australians, the ancient Peruvians, the ancient Egyptians, and the northern nations of Europe, and continued for 3 days amongst the Japanese, the Hindu, the Australians, the ancient Romans, and the ancient Egyptians. It was evident that the uniformity could not have been caused or preserved by any calendar now known to us, and that the festival must originally have been regulated by some visible sign or mark that nature had supplied to our ancestors and to the Peruvians. Okay, so he's made a fundamental realization here that, like, first of all, the fact that it's both north and south hemispheres means it can't be any kind of seasonal or calendar thing.
Right.
It must be global, and he's, the assumption that we don't have any global civilizations at the time. It must be something global that everyone could see all over the whole planet, okay? And that we would all, anyone who saw it would recognize and pull the same symbols out of it, right? This could be the only rational conclusion, right? So that the uniformity of traditions was, in fact, only a coincidence, unless, he says, okay, but if not the coincidence, the question then begged to be answered is what could have been the visible sign or mark supplied by nature? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff here, but basically what it gets down to is you're going to have the two things that the ancients looked at that you could say that was global is the stars, okay, and enormous cataclysmic events. So there's a whole bunch of other things in there that basically goes into the Pleiades and the different, the Scorpio is heavily involved in this. Okay, so Scorpio, for anybody who doesn't know, Scorpio is considered a really bad sign. It's like this. Nobody likes that sign. Okay, it's synonymous with death. Okay, and like without going to all the details. But if you guys are interested, Randall Carlson has some excellent articles about this on his website. So you can go to sacredgeometry.org and you can find these articles. Just look up
Sacred Geometry International.
Yeah, Sacred Geometry International. Sorry, you could go there or you just look up Randall Carlson Day of the Dead. You'll find the articles. There's 2 of them, and they're freaking amazing. But basically, the concept is the reason it's the Day of the Dead, and the reason it's global, is because sometime in the distant past, something killed almost everybody on the planet. Okay? So, and it must have happened in November or late October. So Halloween is basically the anniversary of the cataclysm that ended the last ice age and killed almost everybody.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have fire. The torches, the fire is the remembrance of the fire in the sky, right? And the reason why the dead walk the earth is because everyone died, right? Yeah. And there's other weird things like.
And then you could, you could imagine that crops are part of this because nature was involved too.
Well, and the reason it's agricultural, possibly, this isn't so sure, but the reason it's agricultural is because it isn't until after that cataclysmic event that agriculture begins. So there's so there's some reason, in other words,
there's a reason why we are no longer hunter-gatherer.
Right,
type.
We couldn't be. It was impossible. Like we had to begin to do agriculture because it was too hard to survive without it at that point.
Right.
Before that, it was more like Eden. You could just kind of walk around and there was food everywhere, and it wasn't hard. Like a lot of ancient or sort of more tribal cultures, or like anything that has people that have wisdom, ancient wisdom that's been carried forward orally or whatever. They always say when they're telling the story of the deluge, they say that after that, surviving was much more difficult. Right. Before that, it was easy. And
it's very similar to the story of the Garden of Eden.
That's right. The Garden of Eden
kicked out, flaming sword guarding the entrance.
That makes the whole Genesis book really interesting. It's like you just told that story, right? Like you had the whole Garden of Eden thing, and if it's an allegory for how the world was before and then after the cataclysm, and then they start telling you about the flood. And you're like, wait, you just told that story. It's been separated into like, here's the symbolic thing, and then here's the flood. It's really the same thing though, right? The the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, all that stuff is wrapped up in there too. The death and the good and evil. I've always wondered about, like, really think for a minute about being a survivor of one of those events. Because like every culture also has a flood story, and they have a very similar stories about the people who survived, which is hard to explain because there are going to be survivors like scattered all over the place. Why do they have the same story? That's really weird.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be similar in certain aspects. Like, oh my God, there's this enormous flood, and holy shit, I was in the right place to not get hit by it or whatever. Right? Those elements would be similar, but that's not what happens. There's always a pre-warning. Somebody shows up a long time in advance and says, hey, there's going to be this huge cataclysm. You need to sell everything you own and build this huge boat.
Yeah, here's some blueprints.
Yeah. Or they tell them to sell everything you own and take your whole family up to the top of a tree or up to the top of a mountain or dig out this log or, something like that. There's a pre-warning. And sometimes it's funny when the pre-warning is ignored. Some of the stories, the pre-warning is completely like skirp derped, and then like they all die. And then you're like, how did we get that story? I don't understand. Yeah. But this makes Halloween literally the most important like festival tradition that we have, because it's supposed to remind us about this thing that happened a long time ago. And of course, people don't know, when you don't know that you need to remember something, it's hard to remember it properly, like oral traditions. There's this kind of a tradition within the tradition of like very precisely speaking the tales. Like, so when the old shaman is teaching his apprentice all of these stories, these cultural stories, these oral traditions that they've got, they're very strict on like, no, you have to say it exactly like I'm saying it. Not just the words, but you need the cadence, the tone of voice. It has to be reproduced exactly. And then when the apprentice is telling the story, they make him do it over and over and over, and it needs to sound the fucking same every time they do it.
Yeah.
Like this is how they guard against errors, right? Over time, keep errors from entering into the data. It's really robust, it turns out. Like some of those Australian Aborigines have memories of like proven scientific events that took place 70 to 80,000 years before, and they have all this data on it. Like there's a lake in Australia that just was recently discovered. Okay, that's an ancient crater. And the tribes that live around there are like, oh yeah, and they tell their stories, and it has all this like very precise information about what happened.
Wow.
And so the Australian scientists are like, open-minded enough to listen to the stories, and then even open-minded enough to go out and see, is this right? And it is. Like they discover all this shit that like totally corroborates the entire, the whole story that they tell, and they're like, holy crap, like we can stop doing science and just talk to these guys. So I'm just saying that the oral traditions are robust because there's this tradition built in to preserve the data, to do error correction. Except that it didn't happen in this case. And I wonder why that is. Like, why did that not happen with this festival? No one remembers why we're doing it. I mean, there's this sort of surface remembrance that it's the Day of the Dead, but nobody knows what, what I mean? Nobody knows what the Day of the Dead comes from. Like, why is it the Day of the Dead?
Yeah.
So I wonder about that. Like, how did we lose that?
It's a good question. Well, let me just answer that question.
Come on, bro. I'm waiting.
Well, I mean, a lot of these oral traditions that we have, I think oral tradition is a technology.
Yeah.
And you could imagine that there was a time it was not needed. And so...
wait.
Before the destruction.
Okay, yeah.
So, we have these, stories about knowledge that's been preserved in pillars, for example, or buildings or some structure, or something like that. Writings, libraries, all these things. and that they were not. Some of them couldn't be recovered, and therefore all the knowledge wasn't recovered.
Yeah.
So you could imagine that, let's say, some highly scientifically minded faction of the civilization that lived prior to the end of the last ice age, that survived the cataclysm and realized that what they had done to prepare was not enough.
Yeah.
Finding out perhaps too late, and then the oral tradition that so they come up with the idea of the oral tradition
Yeah.
to fix that problem. But the oral tradition is more oriented towards where all the knowledge is,
Right. I got
hoping that someday it would be found, as opposed to like, holy shit, we just all died.
Right.
You know?
Okay, I see what you're going. Yeah.
So I'm saying that the oral tradition was a technology that arrived or was developed due to the fact that the original idea of preserving knowledge failed.
I got you. So then they set up this new thing to like, its job really is to communicate down through the ages the location of.
Yeah, because isn't that what it is? I mean, like everywhere we look in all of these writings, it's like,
Yeah.
it seems to be pointing to all this knowledge.
Yeah. The question I was asking, that's really cool though. The question I was asking was specifically about this festival. Like, how did we lose?
That's what I meant. Like, so
You're saying that like in our oral traditions, they weren't so much concerned with preserving the information that would have allowed us to remember the purpose of this festival. They were more concerned about like, here's where you go to get.
that's what I was saying. So like, they didn't immediately develop the tradition for the remembrance.
Yeah.
Like so you can imagine that a year to the day, they're all looking into the sky
Yeah.
and remembering,
Right.
and that becomes a tradition. Meanwhile, slowly over time, year after year after year, the technology of oral tradition develops for
I got you.
trying to preserve the preserved
Yeah.
pieces of knowledge.
Yeah. Now we need to preserve the thing that we made to preserve the thing
Right,
that we
the
couldn't
maps.
preserve. Yeah.
You know, it's like okay, we drew a map to this thing, but the map's no good.
Right.
So like we're gonna
Missing parts, but we need to preserve it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shit. That's
a great idea. I mean,
okay. Well, I'm
I'm just like, yeah, that's one of those deals where I'm like, so how did this happen? It's a great mystery. And you're like, well, I'll just tell you right now. That's badass. That's really cool. See, this is why this is another thing we were talking about. We were talking about why the last time we were talking about this, like a couple of weeks ago. We were discussing this when we were going to do the podcast and about why. And we were kind of discussing how we've always done this, that we've always like,
sit around
a few times a month. We just like sit down with a bunch of smokes and beers, and we try to figure shit out. Or usually I'm coming to try to fucking confuse him with stuff that's confusing me, and sometimes he just figures it out, and I'm like, holy shit, now I lost something that would confuse me. That sucks. I like mysteries, and you just destroyed one. Thanks. But so in another one of the ubiquitous TED Talks that I was listening to, this person was discussing the brain and the hemispheres and how they're completely disconnected from each other, right? And so we have this right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And this is a neuroscientist who, so some people may have heard of her. She's I don't know her name, but she's a neuroscientist who had a stroke, and she recovered from it, obviously. And so now she says, like, I was a neuroscientist who had the fascinating experience of being able to watch my brain begin to fail, right? From the inside. She got to experience it. And of course, a lot of the experiencing took place in a brain state where she no longer was a neuroscientist. She was almost not anything because her brain had failed. But it was all in her left hemisphere. Her left hemisphere was the one that had the stroke, that had this enormous aneurysm, this blood explosion. So she loses her language because your left hemisphere is what can talk, right? And she loses all of her logical thinking. She loses her linearity, the ability to see her life and her memories as a line of things that were in the past and in the present and then will be in the future. She loses that. She loses her ability to discern between her body and other objects. She no longer can tell the boundaries of her physical person. And so she was like, and so I felt enormous, like she's leaning up against the wall and she can't tell. She's looking down and she doesn't know like her arm is against the wall, but she doesn't know that the wall is not also part of her. And so like it must be really hard to describe, but you can kind of see how, like, if you can't tell the difference between your arm and the wall, then the wall is also part of you. And you see that the wall goes way up here and it's connecting to all this other shit, and you're just enormous. Like, you connect to everything, right? And she talked about how she knew that she needed to call somebody to get help. And like, she had this idea that the number that she needed to call, or the way she said it was, the way that she could complete this call to do it was that there was a stack of things in the office that had the ability. Basically, she had a bunch of business cards, and on one of the business cards was the number that would basically call the clinic where she worked, not a clinic, but it was the lab where she worked as a neuroscientist. She had a colleague there, and she was like, I need to call Dr. blah, 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 and tell him because I need help. Of course, she wasn't thinking properly, because really what she needed was an ambulance.
Yeah.
Right? But she was like, I need to call someone. She doesn't even know who it is. She just knows he's kind of this important guy that can help her. She said it took her forever to go through the cards because she can't read anymore, because your left hemisphere is what does language. So to her, these cards, that she was having difficulty telling the difference between herself and the cards, right? She doesn't, she's going through this stack, and like, she doesn't recognize anything that's on them. But something in her mind recognized something on one of the cards, and she's like, this is the right one. She doesn't know why, but it was. And she's got the phone thing here, but she no longer she doesn't understand it or know what any of the squiggles on it mean, but she's able to like sort of hold the card and kind of compare it to the phone and sort of press the squiggles that are on the card off on the phone in the right sequence.
Wow. That's great.
And she's like, and I have no ability to recognize symbols at all, so she has to minutely compare the little squiggles to really make sure that that's the right one, because she can't even remember them. Like, she looks at it and then looking away for a second, it's gone from her mind. So she has to like hold them right next to each other and be like, okay, that is that symbol. Boop. And she pushes it. And then, of course, when the doctor answers, she hears, she can't understand speech anymore. And she was like, wow, I can't understand him at all. Then she goes to talk and she hears herself go, she
oh my God.
Yeah. But fortunately, the guy who she was talking to was also a neuroscientist, and he understood what was happening immediately when he said, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? And she spoke back like barking like a dog or whatever. So she got help. But the next thing that happened to her is her left hemisphere basically completely failed, and she was then only her right hemisphere, which is normally very suppressed by the left. The left hemisphere is the dominant part of the brain. But the right hemisphere is what does all the important shit that we think of as making us human. It's where all of our emotions are. It's where our artistic abilities are. It's where our creative abilities are. It's where our intuitive abilities are. It's where we deal with other people. And social things happen there, but it can't talk. It does not get language at all, right? So whenever, like, so somebody's giving you all this data and you've got all this information or whatever, and you're like, yeah, but something doesn't feel right. That's your right hemisphere talking to you, trying to. It doesn't have words to say, but it's trying to get your attention. So you have all this enormous left brain information, but you're just like, still kind of uncomfortable here. That's the right hemisphere. And it's really smart.
So some people call that like intuition, or whatever.
That's what I'm saying. All of that stuff, everything like intuition, precognition, like anything that you consider.
It's interesting to think about it in that way, breaking it down like that, though. So I had this definition of intuition in my mind,
like the gut thing.
Yeah. Where now I'm thinking of it like, actually, no, that's like some legit shit that I just can't put into language.
It cannot be put into language.
But that side of the brain is like taking that information and like, blurp. It's like, okay,
yeah,
I need to figure out what that side of the brain is doing with it.
And your left hemisphere is
not mine.
Is like the way it operates, it cannot deal with the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere like does not deal, like they don't work well together. Well, they do really, but we're fundamentally split is what she was basically saying. And she actually had a brain. Like, she actually had a human brain. Like, that you could hear the whole crowd. She's like, this is a brain, and yes, it's a real one. She picks it up, and the spinal cord's all, and it's like dangling down there, and you can hear the whole crowd like, ugh. And she's like, yep. And she like very softly like opens it up like a flower to show you that the hemispheres are like, they're only connected by this little bitty kind of ganglion wire going, and it's, it's a shitload of neurons, but it's a very thin, they call it the corpus something or other. It's where the two hemispheres connect, and that's all their communication takes place through this little tiny thin.
The internet.
Yeah, that's right. It's their fucking, the wire with the like the cans at the end.
Yeah.
But some people are born with those things gone, and she says that those people are always two people. They're two separate people because the hemispheres are two separate people, and when they cannot communicate to each other at all, they will act like two totally separate personalities that will switch back and forth from running the body. But the left usually dominates. So anybody with a regular brain that has that the central the wire connecting going across, normally they interact with the world generally like I'm doing right now. Like there's a logical progression. I'm thinking linearly. There's a past and a present and a future, right? I know who I am and I understand the boundaries of my body. The left hemisphere is your individual. It's the thing that makes you yourself and not anyone else. The right hemisphere is like, I'm connected to everything and I am all, right? That's how it is. That's why she couldn't no longer tell the difference between her arm and the wall, right? But most people never can fully embody their right hemisphere. It just doesn't. The left is too strong and is too like sort of controlling. But because her left hemisphere died completely during the stroke, for a while she inhabited only her right. And she was like, this was an amazing experience. Because suddenly, like, even though all this horrible stuff was happening, I was like blissfully happy. You know, she was like, this is amazing. Even though she couldn't talk, she didn't think in those words. Just it was just the feelings, right? So eventually, she has to go to let's rehab. She has to go to the hospital. They have to all this bullshit has to happen. Now she's a normal person again that can talk and all this. She had to relearn all these abilities, right? But she still can choose at any given moment, right hemisphere or left hemisphere. She could switch back and forth between them on command. And she's like, this would be world changing if everyone could do this. Because you just easily...
Tray pan.
Yeah. Where's that old lobotomic door? Need to go back to that. But like, she's like, if you're feeling down or you're like, you don't understand what's happening or whatever, she just switches over and she's like, and she's with the universe and everything's amazing and badass. It's like the literal nirvana that the Buddhists seek. Like she could just switch over to it and just, it's like, she's like, oh my God, I am, butterflies and birds and shit like that, and then she comes back to the left hemisphere, back to her normal logic, linear thinking person. But having had that experience now in her linear past, she's like, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Right. So what's interesting to me, and the reason I just told that enormous TED Talk thing, you guys should just go watch the TED Talk. She does it way better than I do. Is that Kyle's left-handed, so his right hemisphere knows how to talk. So if I'm up there at the top and I'm doing research or whatever, and like suddenly my right hemisphere is like, I'm like, okay, I need to go talk to Kyle because his right hemisphere can talk, and mine's trying to tell me something right now, and I don't know what it is.
But my left hemisphere can't talk. So.
Yeah.
So we make a good combination. Like we sit down and start talking about shit, and we're no matter what we do, we're approaching it from the opposite side.
That's right. But between the both of us,
but there's no way to tell which one's left or right.
That's right. Only you have to use a
weird beta decay of
that's right.
something.
That's right. At least aliens would be able to understand it. But so between us, I think of it, it's like between us, we have a brain that both hemispheres can communicate, right? Effectively. So I'll say a bunch of left hemisphere shit, and then he'll say a bunch of right hemisphere shit. But his right hemisphere has a lot of left hemisphere attributes, but it still retains some right hemisphere attributes. Like in other words, his brain is more equally. It's more, it's got a lot more equality than my brain does.
I remember when
my brain is rigidly stratified.
I remember when I was like 12 or 13. Russ taught me logic. He was like, "Hey, there's this thing
called logic.
It's called logic. You should try it." And I was like, "Holy fuck!" Mind blown.
That's not even fair to use that shit.
I was like, "Damn, dude, my life just got way easier." Shit. Never look back.
Yeah, that's badass. Well, all that stuff that I said in the last segment, all that shit that I was trying to talk about that mostly comes from my right hemisphere, I learned how to dive into that shit from dealing with from talking with you. Oh, and it's way less.
Sorry, bro. I emo'd you.
No, it's not emo. Like Like you have like, just like I could sit down and be like, well, here's all these like very rigid steps that you can take to do this. Like you do this sort of non-intuitive, well, I guess I should say it's intuitive. It's non-logical, but there's these ways of dealing with that kind of shit where I'm like, you know, there's some crap that's happening to me that's emotional and overwhelming. Most people are just like, I don't, you know, like Dad has nightmares. He doesn't even want to talk about them. He doesn't want to deal with them. Right. He's just like, left hemisphere's answer to that is to ignore it. Right. But we've done all this talking or whatever. And you have ways of like maneuvering through shit like that I just have to follow you. I just have to follow and hope that you know where you're going. Right. So what I'm trying to say is
maybe that's the reason for those dreams.
Yeah, I also have another set of reoccurring dreams. I haven't had these in a while, but I used to tell him about them all the time. Where I'd be doing something with him, and we're kind of going along. It's usually I always think of it as in his car, but we're driving and shit, and I'm in the passenger seat, I'm smoking or whatever, and suddenly something crazy happens, like bullets start flying through the car. And he's like, God damn it! He stops the car and he gets out, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I follow him around to the back. He like flips the back of the car open, and there's all these weapons in there. And he grabs one. He's like, starts shooting it, like he knows what's fucking happening. And I'm just like, what the fuck? What the actual fuck is going on? And like the rest of the dream is me following behind Kyle, trying to figure out what the fuck. And he seems to know everything that's going on, and nothing surprises him. And he's murdering all these people, and I'm just like, what the fuck?
Oh my god. Oh, shit.
So yeah, it is a lot like that with this shit. I just have to follow you and hope you know what you're doing. And I'm usually going, what the fuck? But yeah, so like the whole maneuvering through all that stuff so that I could explain something that was really deeply emotionally powerful is something that I learned watching you and working with you on doing things like lyrics and music. And like you have this method of sort of feeling that shit out and extracting maximum meaning from it. Which I had never been able to duplicate, but at least it allows me to say, I can try this and dive in, which is what I did.
Hell yeah.
So the whole thing about the brains and the hemispheres is I was basically saying this is part of the how of what we're doing. So we've had these discussions, and we're way over time here, but
who cares? We've
had these discussions ever since we stopped kicking each other's asses, which is like when I think Kyle was like 12 and we stopped doing that. He finally won, and I was like, okay, we're done. I give up. I surrender. I was not prepared to escalate to boiling water, so I just was like, this fight is over. I give up. But the discussions have always had this cadence.
Yeah.
And like we didn't know it at the time, but they follow this sort of pattern that has become incredibly powerful. You know, like I sort of expect it. I come down here not because I'm thinking like let's drink some beers and talk about the universe, but because I come down here because I have like very specific, very strange questions that I've been asking myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna go ask these questions around Kyle, and I know that when we're done with that conversation, that I won't have answers. But I will have questions that are much further down the line than the ones that I started with. Right?
Yeah.
So that's badass. And like it also is I'm sure there are other brothers out there that has one that's right-handed and one that's left-handed, and they do this, maybe. I don't know. A lot of people comment on how well we get along, and they're like, that's really rare. So maybe not. Like people are like, you really get along with your brother? That's wow, that's really rare, right? And I'm like, well, he's useful, you know. He helps me get like internet points. Like I get upvotes for saying stuff that he thought of.
Yep. The best way to use somebody is to make them think you're useful.
That's right.
You know, I'm going to use somebody
That's right. To buy some weed. So yeah, so these discussions. These discussions have been like they're not just tossing like what people call bull sessions where you're just sort of throwing things around. Like they progress, they go places. Like we've had discussions that were in one night. I've had my world blown like multiple times, and when I'm going to bed, I'm like I am a vastly different person than I was when I started this day.
Yeah.
Because I have like completely changed my worldview 4 times this night. Like I don't even remember who I was before. can't imagine thinking that way anymore. So it's like
Yeah, so back to the why in that is like one of the other reasons that's not so fundamental in terms of like
yeah.
our individual desire to podcast, but it's that like, dude, we should like every time when we have those like mind-blowing mind explosion conversations, we're like, damn it, we should write this shit down. Somehow like catalog what we're talking about, but we never do it.
Yeah.
So this is a way.
Writing is hard.
This is a way to do it, and it's a very convenient way to do it, and even though we have no structure, we don't have show notes, we don't have any of that shit, we just show up here and talk about shit.
Yeah.
It's still like just fitting it into the format of like 45 minute
numbers
segments has helped kind of hone the ideas down into
to distill them down into like brevity and wit.
Yeah. And it's definitely doing the podcast has, even though we began by just rehashing all of these same things that we've been talking about for years.
Yeah. Now the podcasts contain progression. Like,
right.
Yeah.
It started out as sort of a rehash, but that's why it became the tangent cube.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, because we
started
started seeing patterns.
we're gonna talk about that. Yeah.
And like everything connects in these different ways. And like the longer we go, the more sort of we can actually pick a topic and kind of stick with it without having to go off on so many tangents, because I don't know, it's teaching.
Well, and part of it is we're assuming our audience is now informed on those subjects and understands that they connect, but we don't need to talk about them right now. Whereas before, like when we were first starting out, you start to talk about something, you're like, oh yeah, but I got to explain this a little bit.
Yeah.
And I got to explain that a little bit. We don't have to do that so much now because we're like, they know at least that we've explained it on a different podcast and they can go listen there or whatever.
That's true, but it's at the same time it's helped me sort of organize in my mind like all of these different topics.
Yeah.
In a better way than I had before, because if I were to get in a conversation with somebody randomly about something, like it might sound like episode 2.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
But now I can have a more structured conversation and know the good lead-ins to other
Yes. And also
other topics.
Also, it's sort of like we were talking about this too. Like there's this old, I consider it like a kind of a lost art of journaling, like of keeping a journal, right? And even when it was sort of a thing to do, only a very few people did it. But they've been priceless in so many ways. Like somebody who just kept a daily journal for their entire life. Those people are priceless in terms of history, because they they have these enormous collections of books. And they cataloged their every day all the way through it, and like you go through it and like it's such a good, it's such an excellent way of recording information that entire stories have been developed where that it's based on the idea that one of the characters kept a journal, and like that's the narration of the over the.
Now
world.
we have Facebook, so
yeah.
So historians in the future will be like, so
we really
today we were eating shrimp.
Yeah, we kind of wish that we didn't have this many journals. Because like history
The next day we went bowling and had fun.
Yeah, oh my God, look at my food.
Here's my baby.
But
next day.
Yeah, but old journal, the difference is that old journals were private things.
Yeah.
And so they were whereas the Facebook journal is public, and so it's edited. It's edited in such a way to sort of present.
Put a camera in front of someone and they won't be themselves,
right?
No matter what.
That like people have talked about how it compounds problems of depression, because you look at people's Facebook and you're like, wow, everybody's life is badass and mine sucks, right? But when they're looking at your Facebook, they think your life is badass because you're doing the same thing that they all are doing. So,
yeah, me and Nick were talking about the antisocial network,
the antisocial
which is like where you just put everything that sucks.
Yeah,
dude.
it's terrible.
Like, damn it.
You try to be not popular.
Yeah. you get enemies instead of friends.
That's right. I have a lot of enemies on the antisocial network. That's a great idea. Shit. We should do that.
Well, maybe one of you Russians that is listening to this podcast can do that.
Oh yeah, why do we have so many Russian fans?
Yeah, I don't know, but
we're checking the metrics. We're like, holy shit, we have all these Russians listening to us.
Let's collude. We should totally collude.
Yeah. So the concept of the journal is also really fascinating to me because, if nothing else, like I've been thinking about this, like when I'm 80, if I live that long, I can go back and listen to these podcasts. Just like you could go back and read your old journals,
Yeah.
you know, and I can be like, God, I was dumb. I can't believe I thought that, or whatever, you know, like whatever you do when you read your old journals. But the other thing about doing this, and I've heard other podcasters that I respect discuss this concept a little bit, is that provided that nothing comes and just utterly destroys our civilization, these things are there forever. I mean, we've put them out into the internet, like, so hundreds of years from now, people could be listening to this episode, you know, like our potential audience.
The future us's.
Yeah. It's the future us's again. Hopefully, at some point, the people in the future, those of you way in the far future that are listening to this, have already found the Pillars of Enoch.
Yeah.
That's badass. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, they're probably like, oh man, this episode is, it's like when you listen to something that Graham Hancock was talking about right before 2012, you're like, damn it.
Yeah. Oh, here we go about that again. Yeah. Yep. Because you hear that, like, they had no idea what was about to happen. They're all like, well, I don't think anything's going to happen. You're like, you're right, but you're so fucking wrong, too. Everything changed on that day.
Yeah, but that's why we're going to podcast again later and tell everyone how we were done before.
That's right.
But yeah, this was definitely great. Man.
Time to go to bed, though.
I'm gonna have to go listen to your
segment
segment 3. That was freaking badass. But thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And thank you, Laura, for the new intro.
The new intro. That's right. And we thank Eighth Room Studios, AWACS Productions, RK Enterprises. What's Nick's studio again? What's Nick's studio? What is it called?
Plus More?
Yeah. Smithsonic. Smithsonic Studios.
You talking about Plus More?
Plus More.
Yeah. You only come here for one reason. Only one reason. And that is to kick ass.
Plus More. That's right. So, yeah, thanks to Smithsonic. And thanks to all you guys that are listening. And remember, badass reviews. Shitloads of them. Especially you Russians. Get in there and fucking write some Russian reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can go to the iTunes store and give us some reviews on that. You can give us reviews on in Google too. Like we're totally in Google. So you go to Google Play, you can look us up for the Serpent. Tell them we're awesome. That really helps us out. And we have plans for some radio stuff that we're hopefully going to be able to do soon. Not sure when that's going to happen, but I figured that telling you guys about it will make us more likely to try to do it sooner.
That's probably true.
So yeah, thanks to all you guys. Sorry about the long unplanned hiatus, but we are back now. So get back to work, Damu. Give me some gold.
Snakes!